I have a confession to make. I'm not an atheist. I'm just someone who is angry at God. See, I don't wake up every morning convinced that God doesn't exist. If anything, my problem is the exact opposite. I can't seem to stop thinking about it. I can't stop asking questions. I can't stop wondering why. People think that if you question God, you abandon him. But what if questioning is exactly what happens when you expect better? I'm angry, not because I hate him, but because I expected more from a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good. See, I look around and I see children born into war. I see disease tearing families apart. I see earthquakes burying innocent people beneath concrete. I see cancer. I see floods. I see parasites. I see famine. I see pain. I see prayers that seem to disappear into silence. And I'm told, trust God's plans. But what plan demands this much suffering? What lesson requires the death of a child? People tell me that God's ways are higher than mine, and maybe they are. But if something is good, shouldn't at least some of that good be recognizable? If justice means anything, shouldn't it look like justice? I'm told not to question, man. But why would God give me a mind capable of reason if he expected me never to use it? The Bible itself is filled with people who questioned him. Job questioned his justice. David questioned his omniscience. Jeremiah questioned his honesty. Even Jesus Christ, for God's sake, questioned his love. These characters cried, they protested and complained. They didn't pretend that everything was okay. So why should I? I'm tired, man. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of smiling through explanations that do not explain anything. I am tired of hearing that every tragedy is part of a masterpiece that no one is allowed to examine. I don't claim that I know everything. Maybe there are answers I cannot see. Maybe there are reasons I cannot understand. But uncertainty does not erase pain. Mystery doesn't heal a broken heart. And silence is not the same thing as an answer. So, for the people who always ask, why so angry at God? Today, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I am so angry at God. And the reason why I am angry at God is because, see, life is a way of pushing people to the edge. And not the kind of edge you read about in a book. The kind where your body is failing, where your mind is breaking, where the people who love you are standing around your bed wondering if they're about to lose you. Think about someone like Jordan Peterson, a man who has spent years of his life talking about meaning, responsibility, and courage. Then life hit him with suffering so deep it nearly swallowed him whole. Now, I want you to think about someone like Jamie Foxx. One moment, he was making people laugh, and the next, his family didn't know if he'd ever open his eyes again. These aren't just stories. These are moments where life strips you naked, where every belief you've ever held is put on trial. And that is what most people don't understand. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, I think I'll be mad at God today. No, this kind of attitudes are usually born in ICUs, at funerals, in a cancer ward, besides a child's hospital bed. After a phone call that literally changes your life forever. After praying until your voice disappears and hearing nothing back. That is where anger comes from. It's not rebellion. It's heartbreak, bro. It is a feeling that if there is really a God who sees everything, then surely he saw this too. Surely he heard the prayer. He saw the tears. Surely he knew how much this was going to hurt. So when people ask why someone is angry at God, bro, maybe they're asking a wrong question. So when people ask why someone is angry at God, maybe they're asking the wrong question. The better question is, what happened to them? What pain do they carry? What dream died? What prayer went unanswered? And what part of them never recovered? And when miracles happen, let us be very careful with our interpretation. And when miracles happen, let us be very, very careful with our interpretations. Let us take Jamie Foxx as an example. And before I even speak about why I have a problem with his interpretation of his tragedy, I want to clarify something. Jamie Foxx is one of my favorite people on this planet. I am so glad that he never left us. Even in one of my videos, I remember I said something like, if it were possible for me to acquire just a fraction of his talent, my life would be so much better. So my criticism of his interpretation is not out of malice or hatred, but it is just me trying to understand his conclusion from my point of view. See, Jamie Foxx tells a very powerful story. He nearly died, but he survived. See, Jamie Foxx tells a very powerful story. He nearly died, he survived, he recovered, and from that experience, he concludes that God intervened. That is a deeply human conclusion, but it is not the only possible conclusion. Let us examine Jamie's reasoning. Jamie survived a catastrophic medical emergency. Doctors treated him, his family stayed by his side, his body responded to treatment well, rehabilitation worked, he woke up, he recovered enough to tell his story. Those are observable facts. But the statement, God saved me, is something entirely different. It is an interpretation of those facts. And my question is very simple. If God saved Jamie, what does that mean? Did God prevent him from dying? And if so, why didn't God prevent the brain bleed in the first place? If the answer is suffering serves purpose in life, then why couldn't that purpose have been served without bringing him so close to death? If God deserves credit for the recovery, does he also bear responsibility for allowing the crisis? See, many testimonies celebrate the recovery without examining the disaster that made the recovery necessary. Imagine a firefighter who deliberately starts a fire and then heroically saves the family trapped inside. And if you think this is such a big accusation of God, let us examine the story of Job. In the book of Job, God is in heaven, comfortably seated while enjoying watching people suffer. Then he sees Satan, a guy who's just minding his own business. Then God proceeds to summon Satan. He then asks Satan, where have you been and what have you been up to lately? And Satan is like, just minding my own business on earth, to and fro. Then out of the blues, God asks him that, have you considered my servant Job? Have you considered my servant Job? And Satan is surprised. He's like, I wasn't aware that I was supposed to be considering your servant Job. Now that you've brought up that particular subject, let's talk about it. So Job proceeds to challenge God by saying, you do know that the only reason why Job is worshiping and he adores you is because you've given him everything, right? If you tamper with his health, wealth, and family, he will curse you right in your face. Then, the all-knowing God is like, you bet? Then Satan is like, hell yeah. Then the all-knowing, omnipresent God gives Satan permission to touch Job's wealth, health, and family, but not his life. See, if you read the story carefully, you can't help it but arrive to a conclusion that God had total control in this situation. He's the one who summoned Satan, he's the one who initiated the conversation about tempting Job, and is the one who set boundaries. So, testing Job was never Satan's idea. It was all God's idea. And if you feel like Job was unfairly treated, his kids and servants did not deserve to die, then direct your anger and disappointment to God and not Satan. Because to me, it feels like God has always wanted to test Job. When I say God is like a fireman who deliberately starts a fire just to heroically save the victims trapped in it, please believe me. Another question concerns selection. Every day, thousands of people suffer strokes. Some survive, some don't. Some pray, some have families praying for them. Many are surrounded by skilled doctors, yet their outcomes differ dramatically. When the survivor says, God saved me, What does that imply about those who died? Did God choose one and not the other? And if so, on what basis? I thought that John 3:16 still applies to all people at all times. But nope, turns out God is biased. The people that recover are able to tell extraordinary stories, but the people who don't recover never get a chance to tell their stories. As a result, we naturally get to hear more about miraculous survivals than accounts of unanswered prayers, even though both exist. And are we just going to ignore the people who are forced to put their lives on pause to take good care of their loved ones? How about the people who sell their possessions and businesses to cater for medical bills? Because most of us are not as rich as Jamie Foxx. How about the couples whose marriages fall apart because the pressure of looking after the afflicted tears them apart? How about the kids who are then forced to be raised by single parents thanks to God's desire for validation? See, we oftentimes tend to focus more on the characters who survive tragedies, and we forget the supporting characters whose lives are put on hold or maybe even destroyed forever. When I started this video, I say that I am not an atheist. I am just someone who is angry at God. And I know by now you're wondering, how do I know that I still believe in God's existence after everything I just said about him? See, there's a very big difference between an atheist and someone who is just angry at God. Because an atheist is someone who has already made peace with God's absence. But in my case, I haven't made peace with God's absence. I am still wrestling with his silence. An atheist is someone who has already walked away because they stopped believing that God exists. People think that anger is the opposite of faith, but it's not. Indifference is the opposite of faith. And real atheists are indifferent to the idea of God's existence. They don't stay up late at night pouring their hearts out, feeling betrayed by a fictional character. Anger is not proof that I have stopped believing. Anger is proof that I expected more. I expected justice. I expected compassion. I expected a world that people don't have to suffer the way that they do. Now, let me ask you the same question. Are you really an atheist, or are you just angry at God? Do you tell people that you have given up on God, but somehow can't stop thinking about him? You still catch yourself asking, why did you let this happen? Even though you insist that you believe that no one is listening. You don't miss church, but you miss the version of God you hoped was real. You're grieving the God you thought would protect you, answer you, comfort you, and make sense of your pain. You say you've lost faith, but every time someone says God has a plan, something in you reacts. This is happening because you just care too much. And if you're truly indifferent, those words won't bother you. You won't feel betrayed by someone you had no expectations of. If you still wonder why he was silent when you needed him the most, then you don't hate the idea of God. You hate the silence. You hate the suffering, more so, the meaningless suffering. You hate that the world does not look the way you thought it would if a loving God was in control. And maybe that is why you're still here. That is why you're still watching this video. That is why you're still searching, still hoping that someone finally says something that makes it all make sense. So, before you call yourself an atheist, ask yourself a simple question. And maybe that is why you're still here, still watching this video, still searching, and maybe that is why you're still here, still watching this video, still searching, still hoping that someone says something that makes it all make sense. So before you call yourself an atheist, I want you to ask yourself a simple question. Have you stopped believing in God completely, or you're still waiting for him to explain himself? Ladies and gentlemen, I hope today's video gave you some sort of a clarity, okay, to So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope today's video was useful. It gave you a little bit of clarity, to realize where exactly you stand in. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope today's video was useful to you. It gave you a bit of clarity pertaining your position. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope today's video gave you a little bit of clarity when it comes to your position pertaining your faith in God. So, if you enjoyed the video, you can just like, comment your thoughts, man, because oftentimes we think that we are atheists when in reality we are people who still believe in God. The only difference between us and people who still go to church is that we are angry at God. Okay, we are offended by God's injustice or by God's inaction when we needed him the most, God's inaction when the world needed him the most. And that is why I even think when the world needed him the most,